Good evening, everyone. My name is Erik Flesch, and I am the director of the Mining and Rollo Jamison Museums. I'd like to welcome you to this second of 7 presentations as part of the 2021 Winter Lyceum. Today is the 21st day of February 2021, and I'm broadcasting from Platteville, Wisconsin, home of the world's largest letter M, found on the beautiful Platte Mound in the heart of the upper Mississippi Valley lead zinc mining region where Wisconsin was born. It's my great pleasure to welcome you to the museum's annual celebration of African American History Month. Today we will enjoy a presentation by a panel consisting of Claiborne Benson, Wilbur Arms, and Eugene Tesdahl on the subject of Black history, the legacy of slavery and freedom in Wisconsin. This panel represents a collaboration with the Black Wisconsin Historical Society and Museum of Milwaukee. I'd like to thank all of you who have registered to participate live today, as well as those who may be watching a recording of this event from our library of virtual programs. I extend a warm welcome to current friends of the Mining and Rollo Jamison Museum's members and donors, and I'd like to thank the sponsors whose financial support has made this program possible: Taco John's, H&R Block, A&W Restaurant of Platteville, and Inspiring Community. The topic of tonight's panel discussion was selected among the 7 Winter Lyceum subject matters to mark 3 major milestone anniversaries for our museum. I'd like to take just a moment to acknowledge. 2021 marks the 50th anniversary of the opening of the Mining Museum in the Rock School building. That was 1971. It's also the 45th anniversary of the opening of the Bevins lead mine in the museum's backyard, and that was in 1976 for the American Bicentennial. It's also the 40th anniversary of the opening of the Rollo Jamison Museum in our Brick Hanmer Robbins School building. That was 1981. We have many programs and initiatives in store for this special year, and I'd like to invite you to stay up to date on these and many more programs, plus to make your reservations and your donations online at www.mining.jamison.museum. Our museum was formed in stages, and over the last few years, we've been working to integrate the natural history, cultural history, and science and industry aspects of our narratives into a single unified vision. And the primary takeaway of our interpretive planning visioning sessions is that the expression of human ingenuity, inquiry, enterprise, and development, what might be called the pioneering spirit, in the context of our region over a long timeline, is a theme that can inspire optimism in our community and connect Platteville's past to its bright future. The history of both free and enslaved Black people in what is today southwestern Wisconsin, it's a fascinating subject we've only just begun to explore as we present the human stories of early miners and others who shaped our community. Because you are all here tonight to hear the views and opinions of this panel, the museums are not only a place where history may be preserved in a spirit of inclusivity, equity, and diversity, but also a place where the sense of place of our Driftless region and the pioneering legacy of its people are shared with the next generation. And now, before we begin our program, I'd like to invite you to participate in a question and answer session at the end of this evening's presentation. Because we're a group of nearly 200 and we're doing this via Zoom, in the interest of time, I'd like to invite you to type out your questions as they come to mind and to submit them via the Q&A function at the bottom of the screen during your talk. So I invite you to take a moment just to look at the bottom of your screen there for that Q&A icon at the bottom of your screen. At the end, our members of the panel will answer as many of the questions as they're able to in the order in which they are received. And now I am delighted to introduce tonight's panel of speakers. Mr. Claiborne Benson is a photographer, historian, and a military veteran. He's the producer of the award-winning documentary, Black Communities. During the production of this documentary, Mr. Benson realized that the history and heritage of African American people in Wisconsin was widely scattered and poorly preserved. This realization became the catalyst for him founding a museum to preserve and maintain the culture of African American Wisconsinites, and the Wisconsin Black Historical Society Museum became a reality. Mr. Wilbur Arms has spent decades researching the Cheyenne Valley, an African-American farming settlement near Hillsboro in Vernon County, Wisconsin. Mr. Arms traces his lineage back to one of the founding families of this significant community. He often speaks about this important chapter of early Wisconsin history. Dr. Eugene Tesdall serves as Associate Professor of History at the UW Platteville, where he has taught since 2014. He teaches courses on early America, Native American history, women's history, and public history. He has published articles on illegal chattel slavery in Wisconsin, on Haudenosaunee cosmology and history, and new directions in museum interpretation. He's currently completing a book manuscript about 18th century smuggling between New York and France. It is my great honor to welcome this distinguished panel. Gentlemen.
Thank you. Thank you. So here I am, Claiborne Benson, and we're our Wisconsin Black Historic Society. Thank you for inviting me. I wanted to start out by saying that most people would say that slavery did not exist in the state of Wisconsin, and why could we say that? But and according to the Northwest Ordinance, which is the primary law to bring the 5 states or 6 states into the Union, preparing them for statehood as a territory, preparing them for statehood, it said there would be no slavery in this territory, and the law was pretty firm on that. However, the very people who made the law, such as the military, were some of the first, and they brought enslaved people in as their valets, as their folks of. So they brought them in, and they cared for them and maintained them, and there were slaves. But it was slavery all over the state. I mean, the census of 1840 and 1835 clearly give you a limited number, like 11 and 17, but there was literally hundreds of enslaved people all throughout the state of Wisconsin and all throughout this whole territory in the form of valleys, in terms of canoe movers, in terms of trading post directors, as campers, as doing all sorts of labor-oriented jobs. And there were free people as well, African people in this territory. And so it was slavery. And I have up here the Dred Scott petition of the courts. Dred Scott is living in Minnesota with his owner, and they are headed back to Missouri. And abolitionists approached the ship, asked Dred Scott, what is it that how long had he been out of his home state, which is Missouri, and they draft his petition to the courts for his freedom. And ultimately, it led to the Dred Scott decision. That's right here in Wisconsin, abolitionists that pushed that forward, and that's very significant. Abolitionists were very strong and significant in the state of Wisconsin. And Fort Crawford and Fort Brown both had enslaved people. And it's a government that gives away certain invisible laws to saying that these soldiers coming from the South and other parts of the country could bring their own valleys, their own slaves with them. Fort Crawford is said to have 17 in 1835. But again, I'm repeating, they have as many as hundreds of enslaved people in many areas of the state. And it's not just in the crop. It's the military folks who really start making these changes at the request of Jefferson Davis, who was the commander of Fort Crawford. Jefferson Davis goes on to be the Confederate president of the United States, who really did believe in slavery, and he was a surveyor. He surveyed and was responsible for enforcing state law. He surveyed even in the Milwaukee area, as in the Madison north of Milwaukee. He surveyed, and again, he permitted his folks to have their enslaved folks, but they were everywhere. They were even in the churches. They were working in the mine areas. Slaves were everywhere doing every kind of service for the folks. This is a picture of a military officer he himself brought. Now, in the records in Fort Crawford, there is a notice that that a enslaved woman was killed, whooped to death in the backwoods of Fort Crawford. And nothing was done about it, but it's in the record books, and people did indeed make notice of that. This is the area of the lead minings that existed in 1829. There is in this area, the Mississippi River flows down on the far left, and all the areas just to the east of there is lead mines, and literally hundreds of lead mines. And there were African Americans in those. There's no clear record of how many, but they're African Americans harvesting lead. It was dirty work. It was hard work. I call it black gold. And the lead was used to generate lead for the purpose of for a whole host of things. Excuse me, please. I'm moving. I call it black gold, and that is what this was. And so Henry Dodge is our territorial governor. He is our first United States congressman and our first United States senator. He comes here in 1827. He tells his enslaved people, he has 5 of them, he tells them that he is going to free them because they're going into free territory. He does it 11 years later. He gives them 40 acres, 60 acres, and 20 acres of land, and each of them he gives an ox as a form of reparations for their free labor. Again, he worked them for 11 years in these lead mines. And again, it's dirty and it's hard, and folks go down and they dig out these drenches of lead, and they put it on the riverboat. Now, what makes this important, when the word got out that lead is found in the Northwest Territory, miners from all over the country comes to Wisconsin. Wisconsin becomes southeastern Wisconsin, part of Iowa, parts of Illinois, becomes a booming community in the late 1820s. And from there until the mid 1940s, there is a massive lead hunting effort. Now it goes on beyond the 1840s, but the slave period is from that period of time. And it's used for all sorts of things. One of the most popular things that it's used for, the lead that is for bullets and ammunition. From the Civil War all the way to World War II, lead is a primary substance. Zinc, lead are the raw materials necessary to make the bullets that are used in war. And again, Wisconsin becomes and there's a profit to be made in this using slave labor, and the folks make their way into it. So they first transport the material by ox to Milwaukee, and then put on a ship to go to the various destinations. Then later they put it on a riverboat out of Galena, Illinois, and they bring in supplies, mining supplies, then take out the raw lead and products to various parts of the United States to make it a reality. So lead is very heavy and labor intense in terms of moving, but again, it's used for so many things that it becomes very valuable. This is a photograph of miners, actually enslaved miners, as they're harvesting that lead, and that lead is being uh, 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 pulled out of the mine. Again, it's hard and it's labor intensity, and it's a lot of work. So now this lady visited the museum. Her name is Miss Bale. Miss Bale was part of uh, the Triplet family and Street family. There are records of the family, and there are records of enslaved people tied to the family in the 1830s and 1840s census. Uh, and she visited the museum, and she shared her family story with us. I didn't have her, I don't have her verbalizing that at the moment, but I wanted to show you a picture to bring this in real life. Her family was not a mining family, but they were domestic workers. And so that they did more than just domestic lead mining. They did domestic work as well. And when the Tripoli's who worked at the fort as the Indian trader, when they realized that it's against the law to have slavery in the state of Wisconsin, they insisted on her descendants who took on their name to become indentured servants, to sign a legal contract, uh, binding her, and this is that contract, binding her as a enslaved person, and thus she is compelled to live out 40 years of her life as an enslaved person in the western part of the state. They later moved to Minnesota, but that does happen. And this is Henry Harrison. Triplet is one of her descendants. He is this is a photograph of him, and he is in the 1830s, 1840s, descendant of her. So I want to share the Pleasant Ridge community before I pass it on. This sign says "free and equal," and that's what most of those the Shepards and the Greenes and the Grimes families, that they migrated from Virginia with William Holder, who is their slave owner, who frees them and in Virginia and brings them to the Pleasant Ridge. They call it paradise, or pleasant, the pleasant community that they settle in. They and they see themselves as being free, but in truth, many of their descendants, many of their family members, you can see in the form of letters that they have, come as runaway slaves, come and settle in the Pleasant Ridge community. They come, they become very good farmers. They create schools, and they write their own history, history. And this is the Grimes lady. She is a slave. They come by the Underground Railroad. They come by borrowing money, but they come nonetheless. And they're well written. They write extensive stories about their lives, and they communicate with each other. They were quite interesting families. This is a letter that they wrote about. Much of this stuff is on the State Historical Society's website. Just write in Pleasant Ridge, and it'll take you right to much of their families. They were quite, and you can see the way this man is dressed. He is, they're distinguished, they're educated, they're good farmers. They were quite interesting people, and I enjoyed reading about them. This is Sarah Greene. Sarah Greene it's a baby picture of Sarah Greene when she's born. They have terrific photographs that they documented their photographs, but they were well written too. She went to this one room school called Pleasant Ridge School, and she graduates, she goes to college, and she ends up teaching school in Milwaukee. Sarah, and she turns out to be a very eloquent woman. This is a photograph of her as a young woman and as a teacher, an educator in the Milwaukee area. They were excellent farmers, and they go on to do some great things.
Well, thank you. I'm Wilbur Arms. I'm glad to be able to be here today. Uh, I'd like to start by saying most people are unaware of the significance of Wisconsin Black's heritage, which dates back before the Civil War. And I'm proud to say that I have traced my heritage back to those times, becoming one of the earliest Black families to settle in a rural Wisconsin area in what was called Cheyenne Valley, which was approximately 8 miles from Hillsboro, Wisconsin. And I'd like to start by reading an excerpt from a letter published in the Milwaukee Journal Sentinel from I.H. Roberts of Hillsboro to James K. Phillips, then a sociology professor at Milton College. They are long vanished, Samuel Arms and other Black pioneers who settled the rocky ridges and fertile bottomlands of Vernon County before and after the Civil War. No statues, no monuments bear their names, but their ghosts live on. In the handsome round barns they built, in the legend modeled headstones they left behind, in little rural cemeteries, and in descendants that they scattered. Something else lives on, the proud, sad, complicated legacy of race. Proud because for a brief period in history of this region known as Cheyenne Valley, west of Hillsboro, there apparently was something close to a paradigm of racial integration and harmony, where Black settlers from the South worked side by side with Norwegians, Irish, Bohemian farmers, intermarried with them, established one of the first integrated schools, one of the first integrated churches in that area. Sad because when white outsiders and light-skinned relatives brushed up against these dark and toffee-colored farmers and their children, harmony sometimes gave way to fear and hatred. Complicated because, well, nothing is ever simple when it comes to race, not even the memory of its role in the shaping of Wisconsin rural heritage. I'd like to talk about the Arms family, which I'm part of. They are descended from Samuel Arms, a runaway slave from Georgia, who played the drum for General Tuskegee Sherman Army before making his way to Bad Axe, now Vernon County, sometime between 1865 and 1870. There in the town of Forest, the Cheyenne Valley, he trained horses and farmed. His Civil War drum is on loan at the State Historical Society. Cecil Arms, my father, he was a son of Herman Arms, who was one of Samuel Arms' sons. Samuel had 4 sons, Adolph, Herman, Leon, and Cecil, and Wilbur. They all moved on in this life. Now, one thing that was important about the area was that it was an area unknown to most of the settlers in Hillsboro and the surrounding community. And very few people would venture there because it was considered an isolated settlement. But there, the Blacks, the whites, the Indians, they all lived together, helped each other. They cared for each other in sickness. When a barn went burned down, they helped repair it. They helped rebuild the barn. They helped care for the sick. They had their own, they played doctor to each other's families. They depended entirely on each other, and they flourished until after World War I, when racism showed its ugly head in the valley. Soldiers returning home from the war, where the army was segregated, where Blacks and whites were separated and treated differently. It all came to Cheyenne Valley. Farmers no longer could sell their products. The Black farmers could no longer sell their products. And so therefore they had to give up farming and find jobs. The Blacks that could pass for white in order to get a better education, to move forward in life. It's a sad, but it's a proud heritage that we went through. This is some of the camaraderie that we had Black and white living together, farming together, fishing together, hunting together, enjoying work together. Everything was done together. There was no color. No one recognized the dark skin, the light skin. It was all the same. They needed each other. They built the round barns. Algie Shivers was instrumental in that. He came later into the Cheyenne Valley, and he was instrumental because he was an architect, and he helped the black and the white farmers build round barns in Vernon County. This is a picture of Adolph on the left. Adolph Arms was Herman's son, which was Samuel Arms' son. Betty was Herman's daughter, Betty Arms. Leona Arms was Cecil Arms' wife, who is at the right. Cecil Arms was my father. Now, we all have that drum on loan to the museum, the Historical Society Museum in Madison. And these are pictures of the different families that we've gotten to know since we've been going to a family reunion every year through a Cheyenne Settlers Heritage Society. I was fortunate enough to work with the State Historical Society to put up a marker honoring the early African-American farmers in that Cheyenne Valley area. And you can see it, it's off the highway. This is a picture up at the top is the first integrated baseball team that they had in there. The churches were integrated, the schools were integrated. Everything was done together. There was no black, no white, no red, no yellow. Now, these are just a collage of the different family members as we gathered around the farm, which we meet at the farm every year for a family reunion. And we bring all of the families together, Adolph's family, Herman's family, Adolph's family, Leon's family, and we're all Arms. And we just enjoy it to death. Oh, I'm sorry. And that's in the center at the top, there's a picture of the marker that the Historical Society put up. On the left and right-hand sides are the names of the different farmers and their wives that lived in the area at that time that started the valley. And there's also been a park dedicated towards the benefit of people enjoying that area and reading that plaque. To the left, the far left, is a shack of where Samuel Arms had 17 kids, 5 of which were stillborn. And also there's a picture of the drum that Samuel played for the Union Army during the Civil War. And he also played it till his death at Hillsborough 4th of July celebrations. Thank you for your time.
All right, thank you so much. It's very humbling to come after both Mr. Benson and Mr. Arms. It's also great, Mr. Arms said the farm is still in the family. So that's really wonderful. All right, so I am Dr. Gene Tisdall, and I teach at University of Wisconsin, Platteville. And now I will share my screen with you. And everybody's been doing such a great job of staying on time, so I pray I won't prattle on. All right. So, and thankfully, both Mr. Arms and Mr. Benson already said some of what I was going to say, so I don't have to say it very much. Again, tonight we've been talking about the legacy of slavery and freedom in Wisconsin. And I want to read just a little bit, and then I won't read much. But this whole area, southwestern Wisconsin, as Mr. Benson already talked about, one of the first places that free and enslaved African Americans came, even in the 18th century, but especially by the lead boom of the 1820s. The Driftless region of southwest Wisconsin is a contested place. And this is Ho-Chunk land, this is Meskwaki land, This is Mascoutin land and Potawatomi land. And indigenous people have lived in the Driftless region for over 12,000 years. So by the time treaties, especially 2 treaties at Prairie du Chien, were signed in the 1820s and then mostly disregarded by the federal US government, these, along with the Indian Removal Act of 1830, they really made possible the growth of the lead industry that has already been discussed tonight. And so it was into that world that many enslaved African Americans were brought to Wisconsin against their will, and then also some runaway folks, as well as people who came as free laborers to Wisconsin at about the same time. Before I move on, I just want to say a few simple statements. Black history matters, and Black history is American history. Black history is Wisconsin history. Black history is important all year long. And that is part of what we are doing here tonight. And it's also part of what Mr. Benson has done at the Wisconsin Black Historical Society for over 30 years. So the first thing I want to do tonight is urge you, even if you are just learning about the Wisconsin Black Historical Society and Museum tonight, maybe you are just learning about it, you should join this museum. I'm leaving this slide up a little while, so you can take a picture of this link, pull out your phone, take a picture of that link. That's how you join, that's how you donate. And so while many of you might already be aware of the Mining and Rollo Jamison museums, which you could also join, I strongly urge you to join the Wisconsin Black Historical Society and Museum. They're doing incredible work, and it's really, really important. And just so you know, I'm a man of my word. I don't know if Claiborne has seen this yet, but I joined yesterday, Claiborne. So hopefully other people will follow suit.
Thank you.
My pleasure. So the things I want to do in my part here, confronting myths, restoring personhood, and talk about growth, ways to grow after tonight. So first off, and don't get too mad here, Claiborne, this myth is not, I'm not contesting that this march took place in 1967. So this is the NAAC Youth March that Mr. Benson was discussing earlier tonight. It's a very important historical event of the 1960s in Milwaukee, but it brings to me what I call myth number 1. So there are some people, especially in Southwest Wisconsin, but in other parts of Wisconsin, who, like both of the previous presenters have said, they don't think that Black folks ever lived in the country in Wisconsin, that they lived in rural areas and worked in rural areas. So some people are still under the notion that African Americans who live in Southwest Wisconsin must have moved there after 1967, which is not true. It's much more complicated than that. So we will be shattering that myth. Also, here's myth number 2. So you can see on this map, the notion that, you know, in the Civil War, Confederate states have the battle flag of Northern Virginia there, and then the rest of the states have the United States flag. But the problem with this image, as again, Mr. Benson has already mentioned, there was illegal slavery in places like the Midwest where it wasn't supposed to be, and also illegal slavery in New England as well. So this myth, I like to say, some people, they think that just because they live in a state that fought for the Union, they assume then that there was never slavery there, and that is not true. And so enslaved folks who were illegally enslaved in places like Wisconsin must be remembered, and that troubling chapter must be part of that American story. So again, I'll do this briefly, but here's the statement that Mr. Benson was referencing. So the Northwest Ordinance, Article 6, says that slavery was illegal from Ohio to Minnesota beginning in 1787, and that was Shawnee land and Weah land, Potawatomi land, but the US claimed it and didn't enforce these laws very well at all. So again, here's that map, shows you the Northwest Ordinance started there in Ohio, part of Minnesota, and includes Wisconsin that we are talking about tonight. Here's a map that I hope you find helpful. We've got many of the places we've been talking about tonight. Madison, Wisconsin. I couldn't squeeze Milwaukee on there, I'm sorry. But Galena, Illinois, Dubuque, Iowa, Lancaster, Wisconsin, Platteville, Wisconsin, Pleasant Ridge, and then Cheyenne Valley. And as Mr. Arms said, the historical marker there in the Cheyenne Valley is really worth reading, and it's worth driving up to Vernon County. So if you are in the area or will plan a trip to Wisconsin, if you're joining us from far away, this is a must-see place, and it's a beautiful, beautiful valley even today. But these are some of the places we're talking about: Platteville, Pleasant Ridge, Cheyenne Valley, Galena. All right, so in 2017, I was not expecting ever to do much research on free and enslaved African-American lead miners in Wisconsin. I've mostly studied Native American men and women in various parts of North America. But I had a group of remarkable students in 2017: Deja Roberson, Tori Kusabucky, Simone Rand, Liz Larison, and Winnie Redfern. And these remarkable students at the University of Wisconsin-Platteville, they did primary document research. They went into the 1845 Bevins lead mine. They went to Carmel Church Cemetery, where free Black lead mine owner James D. Williams is buried. And they went to Pleasant Ridge, and we did all sorts of wonderful work in and out of archives. And in 2018, they got to present that research at the US House of Representatives at a symposium in Washington, DC. And so that was really remarkable work. Here are those students and me in the Southwest Wisconsin room, the archives at the University of Wisconsin-Platteville. A year later, another group of remarkable students and I did the Celebrating Rachel project in the summer of 2019. Caitlin Niehaus, Brandon Snyder, Kelly Crown, Keegan Miles, Joe Adante, and Dylan Abernathy. And what this project was, and you'll see it a little bit here, Rachel was one of the women who was illegally enslaved by the founder of Platteville, John Rountree. John Rountree founded Platteville, Wisconsin in 1827, which was at that time free Michigan territory. And within just a few years, by 1830, he was enslaving Rachel and then a woman named Maria and her son Felix. And this is Rachel's headstone, which was had broken by about 2016 at least. Does not seem to have broken from vandalism, but broken from being over 100 years old. And so these students worked on that. Also, I won't go into all of this, but Mr. Benson already mentioned Tom, Joe, Jim, Lear, and Toby, the 5 people whom Henry Dodge, the first territorial governor, enslaved illegally. And once again, he promised them their freedom very shortly, by 5 years after 1827. But in fact, not only did he free them 11 years later, as Mr. Benson said, but please process this. Henry Dodge had already served 18 months as the governor of free Wisconsin Territory, office that he took in 1836. And he did not free these 5 African-American people until 18 months after serving in that office. It's galling. So here's Henry Dodge, enslaver. He also did some other things. But it's important that we remember that many of these people who are often celebrated and commemorated in Wisconsin and Southwest Wisconsin, that they were roundly ignoring federal law, and they felt that they could because no one was holding them accountable. It still absolutely was against federal law. And so while some people at Cheyenne Valley had come as free African Americans to this area to farm. Others like Joe, Jim, Tom, Lear, and Toby were brought against their will, and that's important to remember. So George W. Jones, he was the founder of Cincinnati, Wisconsin, and he would go on to be a territorial representative of Free Michigan Territory, Free Wisconsin Territory, and then be the first senator of a free state, Iowa. He brought 7 enslaved people with him in the 1820s to Cincinnati near Dubuque, Iowa. And here is John H. Rountree, an enslaver. I already spoke to you about him founding Platteville, becoming a state representative and a supporter of higher education in Platteville, but he enslaved illegally Rachel, Maria, and Felix. So here in 2019, you can literally barely see, there's a rubbing here from 2019. This is the R that is on Rachel's headstone. Rachel's headstone was broken. And in 2019, then this was the state of that stone when my students and community volunteers were restoring it and repairing it. Rachel died somewhere around 1854 and is buried in the Rountree family burial plot at Hillside Cemetery in Platteville, Wisconsin. You can visit her stone still today. You can see her stone, which only stands about 10.5 inches high. It's out of cheap local native limestone. Rountree's stone over here is this obelisk. It is over 10 feet high and out of marble. So some people have said that Rountree honored Rachel, a woman he enslaved illegally for about 13 years in Platteville. Some people say and argue that Rountree was honoring Rachel by burying her in the family burial plot. I would like you to think then about how much honor there is then in a 10-inch stone versus a 10-foot obelisk, and that her stone is only marked with the letter R, not with her full first name, not with the last name, not with a birth date, not with a death date. And so here on the left, this is what her stone looked like after community volunteers and my students restored her stone. So you can read it, and it should last decades to come. Here is community volunteers and students doing that work on July 8th of 2019 at Hillside Cemetery in Platteville. And here's people, including me, talking while this volunteer was doing most of the work. He was very proficient stonemason. And this is Dr. Christy Clark-Pujara, who is a partner on this project. She is a professor of history and African American studies at UW-Madison. And then that fall, community members and students joined along with Reverend Gus Barnes to rededicate Rachel's stone. And it was a very moving ceremony that fall, October 2019. And so also we've been talking about illegal slavery and its use in mining. So notice David Walker was a free Black tailor and clothing shop owner in Boston. He wrote a very incendiary piece of literature in 1829 called David Walker's Appeal to Colored Citizens of the World. And it was a bestseller. It also had so many opponents, even some non-enslavers even didn't like this book, because he even blamed Northern whites who never engaged in chattel slavery. He called them pretenders to Christianity. He said that if you were not working to actively tear down enslavement, then you were part of the problem, and that made many people uncomfortable. But notice he also said this, quote, "The whites are dragging us around in chains and in handcuffs to their new states and territories to work their mines and farms to enrich them and their children," end quote. Walker published this at a time when Slave labor was being used in gold mines in Dahlonega, Georgia, on Cherokee land. This is the same time that slave labor is being used in places like Platteville, Wisconsin, and Gratiot, Wisconsin, on Ho-Chunk land. So he is generally condemning slavery used in mining at this very moment. Here is the deed of sale for Maria and Felix. So John Rountree purchased Maria and her son Felix in May of 1830 for the sum of $330. This document is at the Joe Davies, Illinois County Clerk of Deeds office. I could say a lot about this document, but once again, John Rountree, who had been in Wisconsin for only 3 years, he'd come from Kentucky. His family were slaveholders and enslavers in Kentucky. But here, Rountree purchased illegally Maria, who was 19 in 1830, and her 18-month-old son, Felix. Now, some people, again, have defended this action. I urge you to consider what kind of person is purchasing a 19-year-old woman and her 18-month-old son like property or livestock at a time when he knew fully that that had been illegal in that place for over 40 years. It's a troubling, troubling fact that we should square ourselves with. History needs to be more than just celebrating rich, important white men. It needs to include all people, and it includes the beautiful actions of the past, but the troubling actions of the past as well. Two other important figures in this story are James D. Williams, who I mentioned a moment ago. He came to near Rui, Wisconsin, north of Platteville in the 1860s, and would become a free he came free, but he would be a lead mine owner. And he would even occasionally, as Mr. Arms said, he would even hire local white workers to work at his lead mine. So that's a pretty powerful story as well. America Jenkins had been enslaved at Potosi, Wisconsin, and would then be a free laborer in Lancaster, Wisconsin, before moving eventually near the end of her life to Pleasant Ridge, where she would be a prominent member of that free Black settlement. So Pleasant Ridge, I'm going to say this briefly, so I'm not going to read everything that's there. But again, the Shepard, Grimes, and Greene families were the free Black families who founded Pleasant Ridge. Several members fought in the US Civil War for the Union forces, and other families would come to Pleasant Ridge in the aftermath of the Civil War, finding security in Wisconsin. Part of Pleasant Ridge has now been reconstructed at Old World, Wisconsin, in Eagle, Wisconsin, which is closer to Milwaukee. And so part of that story is being told there in eastern Wisconsin as well. And it's a very, very important story, just like the story of Cheyenne Valley. Here, just briefly, this is one of the advertisements that was calling Black men in the North, especially, to fight. So about 179,000 African-American men served in the Union. And also, some people say different reasons that different people fought fought in the Union, especially. But notice that this man, a free Black man in New Orleans in 1863, he said, "We will fight for what we want. Liberty must take the day and nothing shorter." And Black soldiers in the Civil War were paid $10 a month, not $13 a month. So notice that even though their actions were absolutely significant, there was still this bigotry being faced just by how Union soldiers like like Mr. Arms' descendant, the drummer boy, they were not being paid at the same rate as white soldiers. And notice this too, if you, Mr. Benson talked about Prairie du Chien, and if you don't know your Wisconsin geography much, notice that Charles Shepard and John, his son, walked from Pleasant Ridge to Fort Crawford to join the U.S. Army. And that's an over 20-mile walk. And again, notice that they would also not come back from the Civil War. So it's important to remember these families that founded Pleasant Ridge and other significant Black families in Wisconsin. Here's that same image that Mr. Benson showed us, the Pleasant Ridge School, Grant County, 1890. And this is one of the first integrated schools east of the Mississippi River. And again, if you are a student of history like me and know that, for instance, there were schools in New England, in Massachusetts, beginning in the 17th century, right? And there were Black people in Massachusetts by the 17th century as well. But notice that this is one of the earliest free or integrated schools east of the Mississippi River. That's a thing to be proud of, but also perhaps something to be disappointed of if you're thinking about New England history. So I want to close by suggesting some things that you can do, whether you're joining us tonight on February 21st or if you're watching this later. You can craft community partnerships. Notice that the University of Wisconsin Platteville, the Department of History, but also the Department of Ethnic Studies partnered with my students and me on a lot of this research. I've already talked a bit about the Wisconsin Black Historical Society, the Grant County Historical Society, the Mining and Rollo Jamison Museums, and Dr. Christy Clark Pujara in Madison. At the Mining and Rollo Jamison Museums, my students and I helped draft an exhibit about African-American lead miners in Wisconsin. And just this fall of 2020, that exhibit is now a digital exhibit as well, a slightly changed digital exhibit. So once again, at the Mining and Rollo Jamison Museum's website, you can find that exhibit. Also, you can read these books. There's still not a lot of books written on some of this earlier history in Wisconsin or elsewhere, but one that came out recently by Annalisa Cox, The Bone and Sinew of the Land, America's Forgotten Black Pioneers and the Struggle for Equality, is a very fine one. I have up here Dark Work by Christy Clark Pujara. It is about illegal slavery in Rhode Island and the production of what was called Negro cloth, but she is working on another monograph on early Black history of Wisconsin. I'm not sure exactly when it's going to be out, but it's going to be wonderful. Also, Dawn of Detroit, which is about Michigan, but by Dr. Tia Miles, is fantastic. And Dr. Carrie Miller at UW Milwaukee has an important book about Anishinaabe or Ojibwa history in the state as well. And lastly, where I will leave you here is, I already told you to join the Wisconsin Black Historical Society, and I hope you do. I hope you join the Mining and Rollo Jamison Museums. Maybe you'll join the Milwaukee Public Museum. Maybe you'll join the Wisconsin Historical Society. Maybe you'll join the Grant County History Museum and Society. Or maybe you will join some sort of institution near where you live. But these dollars matter, and they matter in COVID more than ever before. So join these museums. They could use your help. Also, if you're already a member of these museums, tell the leadership of these museums that they need to hire more African-American, Native American, Asian American, Latinx professionals in their museums, because we want members of these communities telling their own stories. And that's when they are truly, truly powerful. It's been my honor to serve on this panel tonight with Mr. Arms and Mr. Benson, and I'm sure I've taken enough of your time. So thank you very much.
Applause, applause all around. Wonderful. Dr. Desdahl, Mr. Arms, Mr. Benson, thank you so much for your presentations. I certainly learned a lot, and we've got a lot of questions from viewers. Kate asks, what can we do to make Wisconsin more inclusive and welcoming to a diversity of people today?
We record history accurately. That would be one of the, and he certainly did talk about supporting the institutions so that we can do more programs like this would be an immediate answer that I would say. Gene was very clear on what we could do. Involve our young people. That we're about teaching and educating our young people so that those generations can grow on and on. Our young people are the ones that's going to make a difference to us. They're very important.
Anything else you guys would like to add?
Yes. Well, I feel that it's not just the young people that need the education, it's the older people. These are the ones that are teaching the young people the hatred and the prejudice. And if we can get the people that are instructing them to educate themselves to what is really taking place and why is there such hatred, which nobody really knows what it's about, except for the color of skin. So I think that the education of the entire population, the old, the rich, and the young, is the benefit to know what has been done in the past and not to continue doing the same thing over and over and over.
And only one thing I would add to that is to even update textbooks. So the main 4th grade Wisconsin history textbook, it does include some treatment of early Blacks in Wisconsin, but not a lot. And I know Mr. Benson knows what I'm talking about, but that book, especially those early chapters, need to be rewritten, and they need to be rewritten with people like Dr. Christy Clark-Bajara and other members of the community.
Thank you. Patrick asks about the spelling of certain names. For example, Shepard versus Shepard, Greene versus Greene. Regarding some of the residents of Pleasant Ridge, can anyone speak to the varying spellings of those names?
I'll take that, and Mr. Benson can correct me if he wants, but both of those were sometimes spelled just a little bit differently at various times, with an E at the end and sometimes not, but mostly with an E at the end from what I have read.
No comment. I'm good.
Nancy is wondering about the early lead miners and whether Black lead miners would have been mostly slave or mostly free, or do we know?
I think they were both enslaved and free, but especially after the 1840s, many of them stayed on because they saw the rewards, and there were people who came because of this black gold, because the economic growth and the earliest growth of the state is in the western part of the state. Everything was happening in the western part of the state, and people saw that as a opportunity for their own personal growth, both.
And I agree, both, but in that period of the really high lead boom from 1827 to 1848, yeah. Most were enslaved, but yeah. Also I agree that after 1842, in 1842, most slaveholders, even John Rountree, saw the writing on the wall, and they either freed enslaved people in Wisconsin, or his brother-in-law, Reverend James Mitchell, he left Wisconsin. So people were either leaving or freeing folks, and also many free Blacks were coming to Wisconsin because of the positive things that were happening here.
And one of the enslaved people sued their owner, Mr. Jones, George Jones, sued him in court and won. It was quite interesting, a enslaved person suing their owner. So they're, they were intelligent. I mean, not just the free settlers of Pleasant Ridge and Cheyenne Valley. Um, there were people coming up the Mississippi River on their own to live in those areas. Dred Scott coming down the Mississippi River and running into abolitionists. There were abolitionists that engaged in wanting the freedom of African Americans. By asking him how long has he been out of his home state, what can we do to help you? Drafting the petition, the court to get his freedom, thus bringing the Dred Scott decision, which is just massive. And then the final thing that I wanted to say is that the church played a major role in shaming people like Rountree and others who actually took the initiative to enslave. The church shamed them so that they felt it to be not inviting to continue this role of enslavement. There were some people that were so significant, important in that area that you could see that they rose from being a slave person to a free person to walk their freedom wherever they chose to go to. There were certain people like that that white people respected. That walked around Cheyenne Valley with not just Cheyenne Valley, but Fort Crawford with holding their heads. I'm talking about people of color. And so it wasn't all about enslavement and holding them down. They wouldn't dare speak disrespectful to some of those people.
And the case was Paul Jones. Paul Jones sued George W. Jones for his freedom in Lancaster, Wisconsin, 1839 to 1841.
Patrick asks another question. Do you know what connection there might be between southwestern Wisconsin and the Rockford Seminary for educating African Americans in the 1860s? The question is, where would Pleasant Ridge students have furthered their education, since local education facilities such as the Platteville Academy didn't accept for many years?
That's an excellent question. I don't have an answer.
I read that they went to a school in Mississippi. Some of them went to a school in Mississippi. For example, Ernie Shivers from the Cheyenne Valley area goes to college. Ernie doesn't invent anything, but Ernie is so well read, he encourages all of his 19 colleagues and friends to build this round barn. Innovation, he teaches them how important round barns are in terms of their eating and depositing of their waste, drinking of water. Ernie could repair any farming equipment. He taught his white farmers how to work together in harvesting their crop. He had lights and water running water at the turn of the century when nobody else ever think about doing this. Ernie Shivers was quite an innovative man, and he was part of this. And many of those people were great people. I'm sorry, I don't mean to get on and talk too much here.
And they would have traveled down the Mississippi River potentially to get to Mississippi for those educational opportunities. Interesting. Patrick asks more regarding the Cheyenne Valley. Apparently there's a road tour of the Cheyenne Valley, although their website doesn't seem to have the map of the road tour. Does anyone happen to know where more information can be found on the tour?
I don't have their email address, but the Cheyenne Settlers Heritage Society in Hillsboro, Wisconsin. They're located in the town hall. So you should be able to go right through there to get that information.
Thank you. Here's a question from Scott for Mr. Arms. Are the photos that you presented part of your private collection, or are they available for review somewhere else, such as the Wisconsin State Historical Society?
The State Historical Society has a lot of those photos. Yes.
They were wonderful photos indeed. Patrick says, I heard that the Arms relatives still own the farm in Cheyenne Valley, and is interested to know why there aren't any African-American landowners remaining around Pleasant Ridge.
I can't speak for Pleasant Ridge, but I know in Cheyenne Valley, it just seems somewhere in history, the whites in the area refused to sell to blacks because a number of blacks have tried to reclaim their old family farms, and they were unable to purchase any land in that area. So at present, we're the only black family that still holds land in that area. And when I say black family, I mean the only one that looks black, because as I said, it was an integrated community, and I have a lot of white cousins and so on, et cetera, you know.
Part of that story, I think both Mr. Arms and Mr. Benson touched on this, but after World War II, in a lot of rural areas, bigotry rose in America, just in general, and also farm kids, regardless of ethnicity, went away to fight in World War I, the Great War, and then when they came back, they maybe didn't go back to the farm. Maybe they went to cities, but bigotry was definitely part of this story, absolutely, at Pleasant Ridge. We do know that Ollie Greene, her story and her activism at the Grant County Historical Society is very significant because she still lived at Pleasant Ridge till her death and joined the Grant County Historical Society in the 1950s, which is when she donated some of her family's artifacts. And I was not alive at that time, but I can imagine that there was not much diversity along with Ms. Greene when she was boldly serving on that board at that time.
Scott asks Mr. Benson, what kind of farming would have predominantly provided the living income for those at Pleasant Ridge? Was it mostly dairy farming or wheat? He says he knows Isaac Shepard owned or may have part owned a creamery in Lancaster.
I don't have an answer for that. I don't know. I don't know.
I don't know that part about the creamery, but I'm interested to learn more about that. And perhaps the Grant County Historical Society would probably have some of that information if that was true.
Nancy thanks Mr. Arms. She says she knew about Pleasant Ridge as a black settlement, but now you've pointed out that there were other such communities in Wisconsin, and that was eye-opening. She does ask how many other black communities there may have been in Wisconsin before the Civil War.
Several dozen.
Yeah, there were other ones, not just in that area, but also in the eastern part of the state as well. There are other ones. Moses Stanton had a community, Chilton. We would know about Chilton, Wisconsin. There is near Appleton called Freedom, Wisconsin. There are small groupings and there are larger groupings, but yes, there are other ones. But these two are probably the most significant. Cheyenne Valley and Pleasant Ridge communities is the most significant, and you could see the educational base that these folks had. I think also they made a conscious decision not to return to those particular, especially those people of color, made a decision that they were going to move on, go to Chicago, they go to Detroit, they come to Milwaukee, they simply move on.
One brief mention, in that book I recommended, Bone and Sinew of the Land, there's an excellent map where Dr. Cox has plotted, I think, over 200 free black settlements between Ohio and Minnesota, mostly between 1800 and 1860. So if anybody's really interested in that, I highly recommend that work, Bone and Sinew of the Land.
And if I may, as I end, I'm sorry, Wilbur. If you were just to drive through there, read about it first, but if you drove through there, you find all kinds of, it's not, their communities was not just in one location. There's at least 50 to 60 different small little venues all over southeastern Wisconsin. So it's not, we're not talking about one spot or two spots. There are many spots where farms where people clustered at. So
I'd like to point out that the Mississippi River was a basic route that slaves took from the South to try to find their way to freedom. Now, freedom wasn't necessarily in Ohio, Illinois, or Wisconsin or Minnesota, but it was also in Canada. So there were hundreds of Blacks that had escaped slavery in the South and founded communities along the way to help other slaves get to safe houses to get to freedom themselves. So yes, it's impossible to say how many Black settlements it was during that time that were so-called free. You know, they were still in hiding because even though we had the Fugitive Slave Act, white people could still take a Black person and put them into slavery because you had to prove that you weren't a slave. And most Blacks couldn't read or write at that time.
Scott asks if the presentations and their wonderful images will be made available. He says he teaches U.S. history at Whitewater High School, and thanks you speakers, saying this has been awesome. He grew up in Grant County, attended the UW Platteville. Yes, Scott and others, just so you know, the recording of this presentation will be made available in the coming week or so, and we'll share the link to the to find the video on YouTube, and hopefully that will allow you to share some of this content with your history class. Okay, interesting. Okay, this is a little bit more challenging. Are you comfortable with hearing sort of a challenging question?
Sure.
Okay, let's see. Please forgive me while I pre-screen it. This is a little bit unprecedented. There's a question about finding a balanced representation of history, who one chooses to villainize or not villainize. For example, the anonymous attendee would find it interesting. How do we know how Rachel was treated, for example? People's imaginations can be very rich. She may have had a respectful funeral with dignity. Your attitude of being offended by these leaders is what this person is calling fabricated white guilt.
Before you continue,
yeah,
just notice that every other comment you've read was you gave the name of the person. So does this person not give their name?
Yeah, this one doesn't give their name. It says just anonymous attendee.
Okay.
And for what it's worth, it ends that the person was enjoying the balanced approach that Mr. Arms and Mr. Benson provided. Anyway, now how would you answer a provocative comment such as how do we try to piece together what really happened in the past, and who do we villainize and who do we not?
Well, I wasn't villainizing anyone. I was simply stating, just as Mr. Benson stated, that Henry Dodge was a slaveholder in a place where that was illegal. John Rountree, who I talked about quite a bit, he was a slaveholder in a town and a state and a territory where that was illegal against both local law and federal law. What I was stating about Rachel's funeral, if there was one, to my knowledge, there's no record of that. We do know that her stone is made out of cheap and most people from the period even would say that local limestone was the cheapest stone you could find, and that it is 9 inches wide by 10.5 inches tall, and that it has one letter, a capital R. And I have done quite a bit of research about this, and so other people have as well. And so that person could definitely read some more research. But I think it's really important that when we're talking about people like John Rountree and Henry Dodge and George Jones, we don't need to villainize them, but we need to name the fact that they were breaking local and federal law. They were enslaving people, human beings, at a time and a place where that was illegal. And they knew it was illegal, and they did it anyway.
And they didn't enforce the law. They made a conscious decision that that they knew that this violation was not going to be enforced, and they did whatever it is that they wanted to do. Yes, they did. Even the triplet family, once they learned that it was a violation, they demanded that the enslaved people fill out a agreement with them to continue their form of it. You could call it whatever you want to, but they agreement to continue enslavement after, and she had to sign it. So there are conscious efforts on the part of those citizens, and we have copies of it. It's not like we're not telling the truth. I got proof that these, and look at her. I mean, she is of white ancestry as well as African descent. She sees herself as a black person, but clearly there's more than just fixing food and taking care of the house. So yeah, there's some mean-spirited kinds of things, and they fought back.
And I would say in the area of Cheyenne Valley, most of the information that I've gathered and that the Historical Society have gathered it has been over years and over decades where we've gotten the living word from people that lived through parts of that time, that their fathers and not just their great grandfathers, they all lived through that time, and they were willing to tell exactly how the times were, because it was a normal time for them.
Yeah.
It was normal for them, so they didn't think anything of it. But they, I mean, like, where else are you going to get the truth from the individuals involved with it?
Angie has a question about what happened to the Pleasant Ridge settlement.
Well, they went on their way. Just like I said, many of them went to college, many of them passed away. Many of them made a decision to relocate in other cities. Some went to Chicago. Some didn't return from the service. A whole host of things. There's no one answer to that. But the most important thing is that they no longer wanted to live in those areas. They moved on to those who are still alive. I've even gotten communications from people who moved to Washington, the state of Wisconsin, who came back to visit, but they're all over the United States. And they're second and third generations now.
Yeah, and there's some, I know one, and Tracy Roberts at the Grant County Historical Society, she probably knows this individual's name, I do not, but one of those descendants of, I think the Greene family, Greene or Shepard,
Yeah.
He even lives and works, I think, in West Africa, I think in oil or mineral extraction, but has come back and does come back once in a while to visit Pleasant Ridge.
Jackie asks if someone could please speak a little about the free status of the Grimes family at Pleasant Ridge. When did William Ross provide them with free papers? He's the father of Nancy Grimes's children, isn't he? And they live together at Pleasant Ridge, she asks.
Well, supposedly they got their papers before they left Virginia, but there were Grimes that came in later by way of Underground Railroad who settled as enslaved people. to settle in the present Ridge area. I don't know the details of all of the families, but I clearly have seen grinds, first generation grinds coming in as runaway slaves and came to those communities and enjoyed their freedom by way of the Underground Railroad. They wrote letters asking for support and help, meaning money and such, and then others came by way of Underground Railroad.
Here's a question about the Milton House. Is known for being part of the Underground Railroad. With slavery in the state, it seems like it was still a problem even if they got to Wisconsin. Are there examples of how people would have established themselves after going through the Underground Railroad?
Most of them are on their way to Canada, and Mr. Goodrich is his name, is from Europe. He knows he's going to be an abolitionist, and he comes to Milton, Wisconsin. He sets up. He's just the front man. There are many of his relatives and friends and church members living all around Mr. Goodnow, and he makes a decision to do the Underground Railroad. There's said to be 400 to 500 people who makes his way up the center of the state by way of stagecoach. That's a stagecoach hotel, and so that they come to. They make their way to the Milton House. Now, the underground tunnel that they have goes to a small building on the separate from that location. So if in case the U.S. Marshal or the sheriff comes, they have a getaway place to go to the next building, up the ladder, and then run out through the fields. That's what it's. But the Milton House is this example of or the tunnel is just an example of a getaway spot. The Underground Railroad does not mean tunnels going from one location to the next location. It simply means in that particular location, that is a way in which they got away in case the sheriff or the U.S. Marshal had come. And if I could say one other thing, in 1850, Henry Clay and John Calhoun renegotiated the United States Constitution to say that fugitive slave law is wrong, and that any slave making their way up north would be arrested by either the Army or the U.S. Marshal. And so it became more and more tense. Although the abolitionists were serious about fighting it, they had a lot of stress on their hands because the U.S. Marshal and the sheriff was out to catch them.
Sarah asks, can you share more about how World War I sowed seeds of discrimination in the Cheyenne Valley and how Black families responded?
Can I start that? Well, I know in the Cheyenne Valley, it was the return of the soldiers, because up until the point of them going into the military, they knew nothing of racism. The Black, the white, the red, they all got along. But after joining the service, they were segregated, and then they found what racism and prejudice was. They experienced it throughout the war. Then when they came back, you had Black and white and red soldiers coming back from the war, and they brought those same tendencies back with them to the valley. And the community picked it up, and it was normal for the rest of the country. So I guess they thought it was normal for them.
And I will just briefly say, my colleague, Dr. David Krugler, has written a book about race riots, especially in Chicago in 1919. So Cheyenne Valley was part of tensions. Black soldiers who were sent to Europe often weren't seen in active combat. They were digging trenches and burying bodies and driving trucks. They weren't doing the combat that they actually wanted to do. So that was frustrating for many of them. Also, as Mr. Arms said, then even some white soldiers who came back, right, had also experienced bigotry and brought it back with them in bigger ways.
Yeah, they more or less picked it up to where, hey, it's a better life for them in the military. And so therefore they brought it back to the community.
They were feeding people too.
Yes.
Digging ditches and driving trucks and feeding people.
Yeah.
But they did. You're right.
Ryan asks, can you elaborate on how the Black church of the time ashamed illegal slaveholders protested the situation and helped sustain African Americans enduring the injustices?
I don't think it was a Black church. The white churches were very, they shamed the slaveholders, especially in certain periods of times. It's the it's the white churches that did it. Now, there may have been some African Americans involved in it, but it's the white churches that encouraged them to stop participating. They didn't do it automatically and right away, but it's the white churches that brought attention to it. Yes.
And one thing that is, again, interesting to think about in Platteville, the other main slaveholder in Platteville, when John Rountree was enslaving Rachel and Felix, Maria left, and we don't fully know where she went in the 1830s. But the other slaveholder in Platteville, Wisconsin, was Reverend James Mitchell, John Rountree's brother-in-law, and he was an ordained Methodist minister. So he was claiming ownership over 2 enslaved women at that time. There's all sorts of things that are said there. And we do know that Rachel worshiped there at least once, and that John Rountree wrote her name as Sister Rachel when he took her there. I beg people to think about how welcomed would Rachel have felt when she knew that a slaveholder was preaching the sermon that Sunday, and that there were 2 other enslaved women probably forced to attend that same day. So there's definitely all sorts of things going on in churches at that time. And in some cases, it's anti-slavery and abolitionism, but that was not always the case.
Well, thank you for entertaining so many questions, and I'd like to thank everyone who has submitted so many questions. We'll just end with one final question here, and we'll have to just let the rest go. Robert asks, is there any evidence of African Americans joining Native American communities in Wisconsin as happened elsewhere in the United States?
Oh, yes.
Yes, they are. If I can answer that, if you look at a picture of Chief Oshkosh, the city of Oshkosh is named of him, you could see a dark-skinned man with Negroic features all over him. And just go across the lake Oshkosh and you have the Brotherton tribe, and Moses Stanton and his wife. She is said to be Native American, but she is married to clearly an African American with Moses Stanton. And there are other examples of that, but there's clear, the city of Chilton clearly acknowledged that Moses Stanton is the founder of that particular, and there is, they bring more African Americans to the city of Chilton. Now, there are not a whole bunch there today, but in the early years of 1860s, 50s and 60s and 70s, there are lots of African Americans. They also participated in the Civil War. 2 or 3 of them are veterans from the Civil War. That is a clear example of African American, Native American kind of alliance that exists in a large area.
Yes, and if I may speak, my great grandmother was a Cherokee Indian out of Georgia, and she married a runaway slave, Samuel Arms. You know, and I found through my talking with family members that lots of Indian tribes accepted blacks because they knew that they first tried to enslave the Indian, and when it didn't work, and they found the black man in another country, brought him here. Well, the black man had nowhere to run, to hide, to blend in, other than with the Indians. So a lot of times the Indians would protect them from the slave catchers and so on.
Well, it's fascinating, and I feel like we could sit and continue to learn from you for hours, and we'll have to leave it there for now. Such a great honor. Again, thank you, Claiborne Benson. Thank you, Wilbur Arms. Thank you, Gene Tesdall, for being here tonight. Such a pleasure. I'd like to invite all to join us again next week. Jeff Shave, this is February 28th, presents From B-Town to Atlanta, the tale of a Civil War drum. I was listening to you, Mr. Arms, when you were talking about your ancestor's Civil War drum. That's fascinating. Also, I don't know if you guys caught the news this past week, but NASA has landed in a new Mars rover on the surface of Mars. And Dr. Becky Williams, who operates that rover from here in Wisconsin, will be joining us on March 7th for her talk, Curiosity Paving the Way for Perseverance. So we hope that you'll consider joining us for another Winter Lyceum to come. Thank you again so much for being here, and good night.
Good night.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
At Taco John's, we're blowing up your phone with great deals. The only problem is how many there are.
Crunching, 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 crunching.
Sorry, not sorry. Taco John's, bigger, bolder, better.